Thank you for joining me, fellow Guardians. This is Sam from Multiverse Mission Control, and today's quest is learning video games. I consider the topic of this episode to be something that both established players should be sensitive to, and something that maybe non-players should be aware of. If you're ever having a social snafu and this video seems to nail it, and you don't quite have the words for it, maybe you could just link it to paraphrase, "Fuel my rise to power with your views!" One of my fondest activities from childhood was me and my brothers goofing off around the console. Sometimes we'd be playing together, but it was also very common to see one guy on the console and the other guy watching the action happen. Especially if the player was doing a game that the viewer wasn't personally good at. By the way, you guys are still wizards at Soul Calibur 2. You deserve to know that. Playing a video game and watching someone play a video game are always going to be separate kinds of experiences, but each fun in their own way. On the one hand, you're having the experience. On the other hand, you get to be part of someone else's experience. It's kinda neat. That's why Let's Plays exist, and that's why they do so well. But I learned through much trial and error that there are certain do's and do-nots that you gotta be aware of when you're conversing around the console. I've made many observations based both on my own social faux pas and how other people got under my skin while I was playing. At the end of the day, the player does want to be able to share their experience, but that's just it. It has to be their experience, not you derping through their experience to supplement your own. You see, part of the fun of a game is personally overcoming a challenge, but with any good challenge comes a certain amount of frustration. To combat this frustration, a player tries to get in the zone and obtain flow. So when a viewer chimes in inappropriately or gives unsolicited advice, they're kind of screwing with that person's flow and can end up on the receiving end of that frustration. So, in the spirit of keeping the game environment positive, here are a few tips to keep conversing around the console as synchronous as possible. Now, this is not an exact science because dealing with people never is. There are some people who are better at maintaining a conversation while they play. Some people may appreciate the occasional "you can reload" or "there's a guy there." And some may actually want you to roar in triumph along with them during their victories. But until you establish that kind of chemistry in the first place, it probably pays to observe these basic tenets of communication. Number 1, don't try to strike up a conversation in the middle of a fight. Yeah, I say that out loud, I just want to punch myself in the face. However, I've seen people fail this time and time again. Look, the player is already facing a difficult obstacle that is calling upon many portions of their brain, including combative ones. So, unless you want that combativeness turned on you, maybe just hold the thought for now. And if they've died repeatedly and seem to be getting frustrated, give them a beat to take a breath. Same rule applies to when they're doing a complex platforming challenge, or indeed any kind of high-stakes, high-concentration, high-intensity thing that is happening on the screen. The player is trying to anticipate danger and time their actions accordingly. You shouldn't force them to anticipate when you're going to be adding noise to the equation. You shouldn't force them to think of how best to respond to you when what they want to be doing is thinking of how to respond to their obstacle. Like, you can see what is happening on the screen and you can see the players' faces, so don't just drift into obliviousness and claim you didn't know any better. If you think it's no big deal, let's see you try to keep your cool while you're trying to fight the giant thing, or getting flanked by baddies while someone else thinks that now of all times is perfect pleasant conversation time. If you've ever flipped out on someone for saying the wrong thing or not considering your circumstances, well, spoiler alert, you won't be keeping cool here either. Now don't worry, not even the most sadistic game can keep the action going full blast all the time. It's called differences in kind. Designers have to make enough moments that feel distinct from each other to keep things interesting. You just need to pick the low-energy moments to start a chat. Which brings me to number 2. Be with them from the beginning. Start conversing in a period of low energy, like when they're buying stuff or navigating the menu. And the content of your discussion is important. Curiosity is natural, but for extended conversations, you shouldn't only comment when something interests you. Especially if you don't intend to pick up the game yourself, because then the player may not see any point to answering. Your curiosity will come across as idle and yet annoyingly persistent. And remember, that they wouldn't have chosen this game if they didn't think they were in for something awesome and fun. So if you ever respond to something they're excited for with dismissal, disdain, pessimism, or apathetic sleepy voice, then expect the next few verbal exchanges to go quite poorly, because for all intents and purposes, you just lost your right to talk. Yes, we get enough careless, soul-shattering commentary in real life, thank you very much, so don't go contaminating the fantasy world as well. In order to keep the conversation nice, satiate your curiosity, but also comment when things are interesting to them. Ask questions they're practically exploding to give the answer to. Show that you see the awesome things going on and agree that they're awesome. Show that you see them in the same way that the player does. Show that you get it. If you take the time to establish yourself as a positive force before things go crazy, then the conversation is already part of the fight. The player doesn't see you as another obstacle to work around, but an ally in their glorious struggle. Even then, you should probably keep the sentences with simple answers. Don't jam them in abruptly or in every available space, and recognize when they need to concentrate. You don't want to make them stretch their brains in too many directions at once. I found just by doing Let's Plays on my channel, trying to keep talking all the time and concentrate on the game I'm not kidding, it's difficult. And if at any time they seem irritated or tell you to stop, just give a short sorry and watch until things are calm again. If they're not being a dick about it, then that is their right as a player. Number 3. Modulate your voice to the moment. If things are funny, by all means, enjoy the moment. But if things are tense, show that you respect that. Keep your comments in a low voice and slip them in such a way that they don't disturb the player. Chiming in loudly or abruptly can just scare the crap out of them. Be smooth like calming ocean waves. Don't seek their attention. Their attention is where it needs to be. Just act like their subconscious suddenly became chill. To once again reuse my fondest metaphor, playing a game is like experiencing a dream. And that holds here because the noise around the dreamer needs to be modulated. A loud or abrupt noise can jerk them out of the moment, like a fire alarm going off at 3 in the morning, or the alarm clock going off, or a dog barking unexpectedly outside. But in truth, no one can dream or game in absolute silence either. People do appreciate the white noise, a comforting stimulus just kind of lying at the edge of perception that doesn't interrupt the important stuff. That's what you need to be. For example, instead of going jump, jump, try something like trap. Or if there's an enemy bearing down on them, you might want to go, dude, there's a guy on you! But it might be better to go, guy on the right. Or if the danger is readily apparent, odds are good it's already got the player's attention and they're already thinking about how to combat it. So calling on it in these cases is just jerking their attention away to add redundant information. That is never appreciated, and they may feel you think they're an idiot. You may want to scream it at the top of your lungs, but sometimes you just have to have faith in the player. When things are going crazy on screen, adding more noise to the already overloaded senses is like adding gas to a fire. People are more likely to appreciate advice if it comes through the soft and melodious voice of reason, supplying some comforting direction amidst chaos. As you yourself grow as a player, you'll get better at suppressing the initial panic reaction in favor of a more palliative approach, which is actually just a good life skill to have in general. Number 4. Don't try to command them how to play. This is a phenomenon called Backseat Gaming, and it is really annoying. There is no right way to play the game. For the player, there is only their way to play the game, which they will modulate on their own time as they learn from repeated failure. It's natural to want to help. Or more accurately, it's natural to want to speed things along so you don't have to see them die to the same thing again. But, as I have said, the allure of a game is about personally overcoming a challenge. Usually, they want to figure it out on their own. Of course, it's different if they ask for help, then you can offer a slight suggestion or a little alteration to play. But be sure you know the difference between someone rhetorically talking to themselves to work out the problem and an actual, hey buddy, how do I do this? This is something that I myself have blundered into often with my brothers, and despite myself still do from time to time, and having been on the receiving end multiple times, I really have to thank them for not murdering me. If you are giving friendly advice, just watch a few things. If you aren't familiar with the game, wait for the player to actually ask you before giving friendly advice. If they do, by all means inform them. Just keep it related to the thing they're asking for, and don't dump every tidbit of your expertise on them. Otherwise, try to give advice as a tiny nudge, without spoiling or cheapening the struggle. One complication that may occur if you are familiar with the game is that you may assume that what was obvious to you will be obvious to them, or you may treat something as obvious because you've become intimately familiar with it and don't currently remember what the learning process is like. This can lead you to accidentally misinform the player if you're not careful, so just try to remember you don't have to info dump at every interval. Sometimes, maybe you should just let them learn for themselves. I just recently had a bad moment where I recommended to my brother to target in Dark Souls for the grunts, but not for most bosses, since you typically require greater freedom of movement in those cases. But because of that, this led my brother to miss with his spells when he was facing the Asylum Demon, because you need a target to be halfway accurate with those. I had the script set for that moment because I foresaw switching from focus to free mode in mid-combat is a bit of a leap for new players, but because I hadn't experienced the game myself for a long while, I fell out of touch with how imperative it was. What's more, this was the same advice I gave during my Demon's Souls playthrough, sadly enough. Granted, it doesn't come up as early in that game, but I really wish I had fixed that before I recorded the Armor Spider episode. Yeah. Needless to say, I felt like a piece of presumptuous trash for my less-than-pro commentary. I know just over the course of life in general how frustrating it is when you're trying to do someone and someone else just meddles reflexively and ends up steering you toward doing something wrong because they didn't take the time to double-check their approach, their phrasing, or even how necessary their commentary was. It really shakes me because I know that on one level, it's just dangerous to believe your preconceived notions hold across all situations. People never do more damage than when they are unquestionably certain of themselves. I felt like a hypocrite and like I had somehow tainted my brother's experience of the game. But that didn't last long before anyone worries, which leads me to my next point. Even veterans make mistakes in guidance. This does not mean you're a bad teacher. If you want to get really technical, we all suck, and there's always something we could have done better. All we can ever do is act in the best way we can determine based on what we know and modify the approach to our problems based on what we learn. If you only wait for the day when you can do things at 100% perfection, then you will wait for the rest of your life. Got a bit off topic there. Back to the point. If you're not familiar with the game, watch 3 things. A. Make sure you understand the situation first. A few clarifying questions are fine if you time them correctly and be sure you know specifically what you want to ask before you say it. Don't just shoot in the dark and assume you're being helpful. Make inferences based both on what you have observed in the game and what you have seen the player actually do. Give them a suggestion that seems to mesh well with what they will want to do. B. Be sure you're being specific with your terms. Do not say the thing. Or the guy with the thing if everyone has the thing. Show that you're paying attention. If they're already struggling, they shouldn't have to puzzle out what you mean as well. Phrasing is key. And C, if you're not familiar, then whatever you do, don't jam a million ideas into one space, because if you're not familiar, odds are good a lot of your suggestions are going to miss. And then the player has to take some focus away from the game to explain why they miss, but they don't even get to finishing it back before you're launching right into your next miss. Basically, you're expecting them to teach you the game while they're trying to solve their own problem. If you get yelled at after that, you have no right to be surprised. Over time, when you grow as a player, you'll get better at sensing what kind of advice to give, and you'll be able to describe the right details succinctly without making them feel like they couldn't do it themselves. Once you've convinced the player that you respect their playstyle and their immersive moments, you'll be able to evolve your chemistry above and beyond to the point where you'll be able to be all raucous like the Game Grumps. And when you reach that point, believe me, it is a beautiful thing, but it takes time and it takes patience. Okay, up until now, I've covered more general stuff with my episodes. I just want to do one more regarding in-game communication, and then I'll move on into the genre-specific type stuff. So, thank you all for tuning in. Subscribe if you want to see more content like this, and remember, you all have the potential to get good. Peace out.